Welcome to Las Vegas for day 2 of the $100,000 Super High Roller Bowl Mixed Game Edition. I'm Alex Livingston here in our studio in Las Vegas at the Aria Resort and Casino, joined alongside 3-time bracelet winner and one of the best heads of hair in poker, Chris Death Donkey Vitch.
Thanks, Alex. Super excited to be back for day 2. It's almost like the tournament's just beginning right now.
Absolutely. We got a 10-game rotation. We've got limit and big bet games, stud, flop, and draw all covered. 3-day event. We're on day 2, 60-minute levels. All the re-entries are now closed. We have our final field of 29 players. And Chris, what do you expect to see today after yesterday where Michael Monchek was our runaway chip leader?
Yeah, we have a big chip leader here. We have a few re-entries for the day. Four guys rebought after busting in the end of the day last night. And big first prize, $1.2 million.
That's right. The prize pool has been finalized. 5th place finisher will be the min casher for $225,000 all the way up to a $1.2 million first prize. Have a look at our feature table here. Daniel Negreanu headlining it with $819,000 in chips, followed directly by Matt Ashton, Yuri Jilvevsky, Johannes Becker, Jason Mercier, Talal Chikerchi, and Ray D bringing up the rear.
Yeah, no surprise to see Daniel here at our feature table, and had a very profitable day 1. If not for Texas Mike Monchek having a massive chip lead after a huge PLO pot later in the day yesterday, Negreanu might have been at the top stack to start the day, but still off to a very good start.
Action folds over to Matt Ashton on the button with ace-jack offsuit, and Johannes Becker picks up 2 10s in the small blind.
Hold on a second. Johannes is shallow enough here that we might see just a 3-bet jam.
Chris, we could see some fireworks here for sure. I think Johannes is probably deciding between small 3-bet and jam.
Okay, so he goes with the small 3-bet size.
And it's going to fold over to Ashton, who's going to have a decision here.
I think button versus small blind here, there's really not much of a decision other than whether to just call or jam, right?
Right. I don't think he's considering folding, but call and jam are both possible.
Let's see how these two very studious online legends approach the situation.
Hold on.
And Johnny will certainly call this. He didn't 3-bet the fold 10s.
Absolutely. So we have a huge confrontation here. 432,000 chips in the middle.
And I know that Johannes used a rebuy yesterday, so this is a very pivotal moment for him, risking $200K in this tournament already and hoping to stay around for a much longer day than this.
As he takes a sip of some type of hot beverage.
He looks a little nervous. Ooh, ace in the window.
Ace in the window is not what Johannes Becker was hoping to see. He also does not have the backdoor flush draw. He's going to need to catch one of the 2 remaining 10s.
Yeah, that is a very disappointing flop. Remaining.
Turn 5.
Remaining confident, remaining
Johannes
hopeful.
Down to 2 outs, but note that he's still sitting there, just waiting, not doing the stand-up thing.
Yeah, he needs to know the backpack trick maybe.
Whoa. 10 on the river, Johannes Becker.
That's an exciting way to double up.
It was coming, Chris, the way he was just sitting there waiting for that card.
That is an exciting river card for sure. Look at him jumping for joy.
Yeah, not a lot of emotion showed throughout that hand from Johannes Becker.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Stealing. Jason has another sneaky hand in the big blind with the ace-2-3 of spades. And there are a number of strong holdings out in this pot.
Wow, big hands here. Buried 10s for Talal, again a deceptive hand. Very strong 3 to a straight flush here for Yuri, although Chikerchi does block his straight flush. And then Mercier with a hand that would be an absolute stone premium in stud high-low, but still very playable in stud.
I don't think Mercier is going to be folding the spot. It's interesting to see whether he's going to come aggressive or passive. So he comes passive. By the way, Talal Chikerchi is going to like his hand here, I think, because it'd be very reasonable for Yuri to re-raise him with split 9s. And having the 10s in the hole, he's feeling very confident against the 9s that Yuri is likely to be holding.
And just like you said, Chris, we do see Talal coming in for the 3-bet here to 36,000, trying to punish something like split 9s. We see in this case he only has 28% equity against these 2 exact hands, but that's a little bit unusual with his hand. He would normally be doing a little bit better here.
All 3 players are relatively short stacked, and this pot is going to be a very, very substantial result for
And it's
if not one of them,
pretty
all
close
the
to a
players.
three-way flip here if you look at those equities.
Yeah, all the players have kind of the type of hand you'd like to have in a big bloated pot, to be honest with you. Like a big, suited connected cards. It's Jason who catches best in a way with the deuces, although his opponents probably don't think he has 3 deuces, having cold called 2 bets, and with Yuri catching the deuce of
caught that
diamonds.
dead deuce, yeah. Really bad street for Yuri.
Nevertheless, Jason's coming with a lead, which I think is kind of cool to see how he approaches the spot. He's feeling like it just gives him more equity in the hand, even if his opponents don't believe that he has 3 deuces very
And he
often.
could also have some pocket pairs in the hand and just pull ahead with 2
Right,
pair.
he's saying I have 2 pair here a lot.
Plus, as we can see with the actual equities, he's still 40% with the deuces and the 3 to a steel wheel.
Yeah, he's doing totally fine here. It's Talal who has the most deceptive hand in some ways, but we will see how he proceeds in the spot when seeing Jason catch such a scary card. Yuri catches the flush draw.
Wow.
And Jason catches the
flush draw. This pot is really going to escalate.
I
Everybody
actually
has
think
a big
that
hand here
Talal
now.
has to really hate this street. Both of his opponents caught cards that were relevant to their door, and he sees the 10 fall dead.
Yeah.
This is a disastrous result for him.
The 10 of spades on Jason's board is about as bad as it gets. Figuring Jason for some flush draw combos, some 2-pair combos, and killing his own disguise trips.
And I think Talal is giving serious consideration to folding this situation. He's getting an incredible price to continue, but it's a little unclear how he can get this hand to showdown without running into some premium hands here, given the boards that he's looking at.
Yeah, we can see the cards here, Chris, but if Talal can find this fold, wow.
Nice
And I think that's
fold,
really
Talal.
an incredible
A very,
fold.
very good fold.
And again, just a testament to Talal's excellent post-flop ability.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Yuri and Mercier have almost the same stack sizes. I don't think Yuri believes he has any fold equity in this situation with his flush draw, so I expect to see him play pretty passively.
I like that, and that's exactly what we would expect in a tournament where he can actually save some bets, too.
And he catches
If he does break
queen,
off.
which is a card that could get him into some trouble here. Although now I believe he has the best hand, right?
He does
yeah,
have the best
so
hand.
actually,
It's
very
also a
great
blocker
development for him.
to Mercier's possible spade draw, so I think this is a really nice catch for Yuri. And good recognition
Jason
from Jay.
recognizes it as
Also,
well.
just knowing that
Now, if I'm
because of the
Yuri
tournament
here,
situation.
a very interesting situation if I'm Yuri here. In a normal cash game situation, I think his hand is good enough to bet here because he can put in a bet now and decide on the river if he wants to put in one more bet when he improves or just take a free showdown.
So it's
And he
that spot
seems to
we've talked
agree.
about where if you think you're not going to get led into that often on
Yeah.
the next street, you can bet and then you can make the decision. Note that the betting lead is held by the player who has the better board.
Right.
So on 6th and 7th Street, the boards don't change, meaning the face-up
Right.
cards. So
Jason
Yuri
will have to
knows
act
that
first, no
Jason will
matter
have
what.
to act first. So he has position. He's betting now with the ability to value bet the good rivers and check back the bad rivers. And I think this is a nice play from
So Yuri has bricked, although he catches a very nice blocker with the 5 of spades. And Jason is going to end up with just a pair of 2s or a much stronger holding here.
And I think Yuri really is going to want to check this back and just hope to beat some sort of missed flush draw from Jason.
Deuces.
And Jason has bricked.
Jason
so that was
did
a
break off,
huge pot for Yuri
Monumental pot
Zabolevsky.
there for Yuri. And you can see 261,000 chip pot. Crazy how these pots, how big these pots can get in the limit games at this stage in the tournament.
Yeah.
Especially when on 3rd Street it went 3 ways and 3 bets each.
Absolutely. And Talal managed to save himself from getting down into that danger zone by making a very, very nice disciplined laydown with a hand that was really a very strong holding on 3rd Street, but he correctly recognized that it weakened and weakened as the streets went on. A very cool multi-way situation there to see how all the players navigated a tough spot. By the way, if you were going to play open jams, I think Talal has an okay hand to jam here. This is a hand that would prefer to realize its equity, I think, and if you're beat, you're beat. He has a 4-card 10. He cannot stand a 3-bet with this hand.
Right, but notice he does just keep his foot on the gas.
As Matt Ashton also picks up a hand which could consider just semi-bluff jamming in this situation. How will he approach it? We saw Daniel one hand to go with a similar hand. Matt Ashton's holding's a little bit weaker, but only a little.
And Talal's opening one position earlier.
I still think he has kind of that look on his face like maybe going all in.
Back in the day,
Yeah, and he does.
With like 3
And that
bets,
3
right?
blocker might help inform his decision there too. Chris.
Absolutely, and in no
what I
limit
did.
single draw, having a pair blocker is a
What's
key
mine,
card
TJ?
in your hand. It
1800.
reduces the chance that your opponent has a made hand.
And it also gives them one less, perhaps, good card to catch.
Talal a little bit disgusted to get jammed on here and decides to go with this
Okay.
4-card 10. So we're going to have a bit of a flip here, despite the fact that Matt has a 4-card 9 versus 4-card 10. These equities run pretty close.
Just one Andrew
And
Jack.
Talal's hand, he's always going to break this off. He's never going to pat that queen 10.
I think he's better off drawing to the 10-8. Have the fact that he doesn't have a straight draw, it is correct to draw here, but it is kind of close.
Yeah, perhaps if he had somehow raised and called the all-in with a queen jack, he would have then.
He would have to stand pat. And actually, he's thinking about it.
Looks like he is considering his options here. The problem with breaking, and I do think breaking is probably the correct play, but the problem with breaking perhaps in his mind is that he knows he's going to be up against a worse draw.
There's also a psychological factor at play here. A lot of players in poker feel more comfortable standing pat.
Okay.
You just feel like I have something. If I break the best hand and end up making a pair, I'll feel very silly. And that
Talal
is what
does end up
Talal ends
standing
up
pat.
going with here. I believe he's just thinking about his equity, but I think that this might be a sliver of an error mathematically speaking.
Now, if he had the Jack 10-8-5-4,
Then he would definitely be more comfortable patting, yeah.
You got it?
And Matt makes it, so
Matt
it
makes
was
the 9-7.
irrelevant which option Talal went with when Matt catches the 9-7. And we have lost Talal Shakurshi.
England on England violence
luck.
there as Talal is eliminated 19th place. And we're now down to 3 tables of 6.
Daniel picks up a premium draw here.
Big draw here, absolutely.
Notice when you have a 7 draw, you're not really thinking too much about your block or your 5th card, whether or not you're going to be raising or not. Negreanu with a very different strategy in this game from what we've seen, coming in for a full 3x open raise from early position.
Yeah, and I think there's some merit to it with that big ante in there.
Will Ray feel compelled to defend a relatively weak 3-card 6 against this large sizing? Daniel has been very snug to start our day, and Ray's probably aware of that. Nevertheless, hands do hold a lot of equity in no-limit single draw.
Yeah,
and
they
even
do.
if you think you're up against a strong 1-card draw, these hands do have a deceptive amount of value. And Ray agrees with that and just feels like he has too much hand to fold here.
I kind of agree with that. Your opponents can be drawing 1 a lot of the time. Obviously, Ray would rather have something like Deuce 5-7 where he doesn't have the straight
Right.
possibilities, but he does have that additional 5, which is nice because, as we can see, it's one of the cards that Daniel could use to fill his hand. So he's blocking.
These D2s against D1s, you're in the mid-30s equity-wise. You're not dead.
Right. And you're often able to get some check raises in when you do make very strong hands.
Good point. And he has made an unfortunate hand here. I thought he made it, but instead he has made a 7-high straight.
He's made a straight. So we'll see if Ray D decides to bluff with this hand being at the bottom of his range. As the player who drew 2 against the player who drew 1, you often play quite passively and
Yeah.
do a lot of checking. Doesn't mean you can't have some bets, though. And then if you do check, you still give yourself the option to check raise. Does Daniel go for value here with this Jack 7? Against somebody who drew 2, it seems like it's at least a consideration.
It's at least a consideration. I think that he is going to feel like he doesn't need to go for value here, as he's mostly going to get a fold.
12.
But he goes for a very small value bet, only betting 12. Will this tempt Ray D to go for a bluff? He has seen that pair blocker, as you mentioned earlier. He certainly has a hand that cannot win in any other way. Is he willing to risk it with a straight in his hand? This hand does not have particularly good blocker properties to bluff with, but he might feel compelled anyway.
Now, if you look at Daniel's bet as face value, as being some type of thin value bet going for a small sizing, then you would definitely at least want to consider bluffing with this hand where you've also seen the additional 5. However, you obviously know that Daniel's a good enough player to be doing something like this to induce,
Yeah.
and that Daniel might just decide, my bet looks weak, I'm going to call the raise anyway. So really interesting spot for Ray.
Absolutely considering it.
I would have a hard time not bluffing this hand facing this small bet, and maybe that's what makes this bet so nice from Daniel.
I wonder if Ray's considering whether he should shove as a bluff or whether he should bet raise a small size.
Right. And part of my consideration for whether or not I make this bluff is how thin do I think my opponent can go for value for, as well as how many bluffs do they have.
By the way, Daniel has a pretty tough decision now.
Yeah, so Daniel now
This is
doesn't
certainly
beat
not what he wanted to see.
any value raises. Ray did choose a relatively small raise size,
Yeah.
given how...
Which also looks strong in some ways.
Right. Now, it's possible that using a size like this, Ray's really just trying to get Daniel mostly to fold his bluffs, thinking he's not going to have a ton of fold equity against his value bets. But
True.
Daniel towards the bottom of his value betting range with just the jack low.
Yeah, Daniel did bet a hand that was very thin, and it's certainly a good candidate to fold, I think.
Oh, and he lays it down. Nice
Wow,
find
what a
there
great
from
play
Ray
for me.
D.
So Ray has had to put a couple adventures so far in this round. This one working out better for him. I think
Action now folds around to Daniel.
Negreanu's just going to jam here, right? Mercier has a short stack in the big blind, and Mercier certainly has an easy call here. So we have an all-in moment for Jason Mercier here.
Absolutely.
And
like this.
I don't think Daniel would stand pat. Oh, he surprises me. He does stand pat.
Yeah, I would have
with this
expected
queen.
him also to draw.
So
that
he makes a
10-6.
very similar
to
decision to
that.
Talal.
You have to beat a queen.
Maybe he feels that Mercier would call some draw 2s in this
Yeah,
situation.
you did. Good later. Good
That's
break.
true.
Good break, buddy.
Don't want it.
But I think in general these pat
take
queens
a
are
four
making a
spot.
small error not going for the 4-card 10s.
Right,
The equity is going to be a
I'm okay
little
with
better
paint
drawing
as
to the
well.
10.
You're right
Yeah.
that this situation is
Three
slightly
spot.
different than Talal's, where he doesn't
gamble.
know how many cards Jason's going to
Right.
After you
However,
do
in this
your
situation, he also doesn't know that
Don't
Jason could just stand pat behind him, right? And he would
That's
be
true.
much more likely to be drawing live
Right.
with a 10 draw.
Yeah,
than
I would have
queen.
been tempted to
They'll
draw
know if
1
I'm
to the 10 as
eliminated.
well.
Uh-oh, we've lost your
My
pick.
God. Come on, Ray. You're so. What was it? Nothing.
Squeeze the no
Sorry,
sider.
bro.
A bad squeeze, yeah.
Thank
So
you
no
for
sider, an ace, deuce, or 3, and none of those cards being good for Jason's actual hand.
Good luck, guys.
See you, Jason.
So we see Jason Mercier eliminated in 18th place.
Aggressive lines. Let's see how Sternheimer approaches the situation, making an 8-7-6 right away in this big pot, which is a pretty dicey hand for the situation.
I agree. I think, Chris, versus the range of hands that Scott would be playing as a pat, it's not clear that Sternheimer is ahead of that with the 8-7-6 4 deuce. Typically, we don't like breaking eights, but and Sternheimer does go for the raise.
Yeah, he has played a ton of hours with Scott Seaver in high-stakes cash, and I guess maybe he has a perception of what kind of hands Scott would pat in this spot. And Scott immediately has a horrible decision here, as his hand has kind of nowhere to go. He could consider breaking the 9 and drawing for the gut shot and hoping to catch the miracle deuce.
Probably figures at least one, if not both of his opponents have a deuce, but good point that these guys have played a lot of hours against each other, and a lot of, perhaps, past history influencing the way that they think about each other's ranges. Racner here still drawing smooth enough.
Sternheimer has a very uncomfortable hand, but has made a good decision so far against Scott's actual hand, right? I wonder if he's considering almost like bluffing with his hand here. You know what I mean? Standing pat behind and then doing something.
I was thinking that, although his body language has indicated that perhaps he doesn't like the spot. He does end up just drawing, hoping to catch one of the 2 remaining deuces in the deck.
Meanwhile, we have John Raister kind of stuck in the middle with this gut shot draw that's hoping to catch a 7 or an 8.
Now, facing a bet here, if Scott doesn't improve, even though the pot's quite bloated, I think it's at least worth considering folding.
Yeah. So Scott has decided to call, which makes me think he's probably going to continue drawing, believing that he's just getting compelling pot odds.
And certainly he could win sometimes if he catches the 8.
Yeah.
Even though he's going to make the worst possible 8, so he would only really improve to Phil's pat 9s. Phil could also be snowing some non-0 percentage of the time. There's a lot going on in this hand. John doesn't love this either.
Yeah, what does John want to do given the situation? The pot is very, very large.
I think I would call and draw John's hand.
You want to
Easy
break
to
it.
say when I can see that, that Phil has this 87, but...
By the way, even if he just calls and stands pat here, Phil Sternheimer has to at least consider the fact that Raister could have him beat.
So this would be really interesting. If John pats, does Phil break?
I think John has played. He looks so tentative in the situation that maybe Phil just feels a little bit more confident than he would if he had been a little bit more quick with his actions.
Yeah, the body language is really interesting here. Phil had something
John,
like 8-7-5
wow, I think he's gonna break
He
it.
would just keep the 8-7-5.
He's going to break it. Wow, this is going to work out amazing for John Raister. And Phil is going to be beside himself if he loses this pot after breaking the best hand. And now Scott doesn't know what to do. Well, I think he does know what to do. I wonder if he was considering making a bluff by standing pat and then trying to represent something stronger on the river, but now he feels like he has to draw and just hope for the miracle deuce, I think.
This is actually a great spot for Scott if he does draw, like I mentioned, because now he could catch the 8.
This has been a fascinating hand, a triple draw. If Phil Sternheimer does not improve here, he is going to be very, very disappointed how this hand
And look
ran
how
out.
big this pot has grown. Over a starting stack in the middle right now. John, of course, checking. Did Phil?
We don't have his card yet. I think we can see that Seaver has caught the 10, though.
Right. We know that Phil had an 8. Is this a different 8 that he caught, or is this the card that he drew? I can't remember the suit.
I don't think the hand is updated. I think it was the card that he threw away, as his hand is still in gray.
Correct, yeah.
Even if he caught the 8 back here, I certainly don't think he would bet. I think he would bet a 7.
Chuck. On 6.
Oh, no.
Great.
Oh, and
Great
Phil is
hand,
going to really hate hearing
I
that.
broke better. Nice hand. Thank you.
Yeah, Phil's disappointed for sure.
Fuck.
That was a very tough spot for really all 3 players in
Absolutely,
that
a
hand.
very awkward
I
hand.
knew it was unlikely, but I swear I made 10-7 on the end and thought there was a chance I could.
Well, some of the recreational players can have a bit of a psychological advantage against some of the pros who are perhaps shot-taking, selling action, that sort of thing, where the recreational players are not feeling that same financial pressure.
So Johannes Becker is opening a hand that normally would not be a good hand to open. However, when you have such a shallow chip stack, you have to be very cognizant of not folding until the blinds, right? Because at some point you're just going to be all in, and you may not pick up a better hand than this in this situation.
Yeah, you're
going to
be forced all in at some point, right?
Right, exactly. And we see Texas Monchek pick up another premium hand and have Johnny all in. Now, the only question for Johnny with his hand is, would he decide to keep the 9 given the roughness of his underlying draw? And it looks like the answer is yes.
And I think he knows that he's going to be up against some draw 2s. And against those draw 2s, keeping the 9 makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Correct. And also, if you make a 9 and you end up drawing dead in this situation, obviously your tournament is over, but typically it's different than a cash game situation where you would have reverse applied odds for the future bets.
Great
there
point.
Are no more bets. Unfortunately for Johnny, he is dead here. And this is pretty confidently have to say this will be the end of Johannes Becker.
Yeah, he's got to pat this hand and just hope his opponent made some type of 9. I don't really think you can draw to this 3, 4, 6, 7. It's so rough.
Yeah, he can't like the situation, but...
And You can see that when
The disappointment. Yeah.
when Texas quickly checked back patted back,
Yeah.
Johnny knew he was almost certainly dead.
Good game to a good friend of mine, Johannes Becker.
Johannes Becker eliminated on day 2, and I think we're down to 13 players
Early
now.
position hands.
Exactly. And Schulman with a defend in the big blind. Not a super fun hand, but
Right.
still, if you catch that deuce, now all of a sudden you have a premium draw.
And these rougher draws are the sort of hands that you feel more comfortable playing against a late position raiser than you
Absolutely.
do against an early position player.
And we see that Hennigan does have a premium draw here.
An absolute premium. Powerhouse on the button here.
Notice that Nick just checks in the dark, and Hennigan has a spot where he can just bet in the dark in these
Whoa.
2-1 situations. Wow.
Nick Schulman, not only did he catch the deuce that you were describing, he caught the 4 as well, and this is going to probably be the end of John Hennigan because it's going to be impossible for him to get away from this draw before the river, and I'm not sure he has enough bets to even make it to the river
incredible
here.
pull from Nick Schulman. I think that John will be able to save some chips here if he breaks
You're
on
right.
the end.
Well, unless he happens to make a hand, which
Exactly.
he really does not
So
want to do.
John
now.
doesn't know
Yeah.
it, but he doesn't want to make his hand
He
right
absolutely
now.
does not want to catch this 7.
The worst thing he could catch would be a 3 or a 5.
Correct. He would have a tough decision where he'd catch an 8 on the river.
Now, this is a spot where Hennigan expects a fair chunk of the time Nick to check, because Nick's going to have a lot of weak hands and John's going to have a lot of strong draws. When Nick bets, he's really saying that he's-
Uh-oh.
Number 4?
Oh, wow.
He caught his 7 low, and he is out.
So
He announced number
Hennigan
4,
raised
so he
all in
caught a
there and
5.
said number 4, and he could tell
Yeah.
by the way that Nick called so quickly, he wasn't sure that that number 4 was going to be good.
Right. Yeah. And of course, Nick trying to courteously really put the action as quickly as possible as John is out the door. Well,
Failing overs. I think that decision's been made for him, not that I want to...
yes. It looks like
completely
Albert
jinx
has
him.
found. Albert has to go with his hand here against Ace King. Blind versus blind. Certainly no faulting this call, and still has a sizable amount of equity here, even though he's against the Ace King.
Good luck, Albert. Thank you.
Albert seemingly resigned to it here after a couple tough Raz hands. Jack in the window, however, is a welcome sight.
Albert pulling ahead for the time being. Nick does have that backdoor spade draw, backdoor wheel draw, backdoor Broadway draw, as well as the 2 overcards.
Ooh.
And there is one of those overcards as Nick takes the lead with the king. And unlike Johannes Becker, who just sat there patiently, Albert does appear to be doing the stand-up move. And it was a picture card, but not the one that Albert was looking for, as Albert Daher is eliminated.
So our players continue to drop quickly. And as you suggested, we are going to end up with some pretty short-handed play relatively soon here in this tournament.
Yeah, and this is,
hello.
wow, and Mike's got the buried jacks. Now, is this a spot, Chris, where you might consider employing some limps with range as Schulman here?
I mean, I think that he maybe would have considered that. However, given the strength of his hand, he's very happy to play a big one here.
Yeah, just
I do
in
not also
general,
fault,
I mean.
Yeah, I don't fault Texas Mike for his 2-bet here.
Nor do I.
So in general here, yes, when you have a small card underneath, notice Nick Schulman is going with the 3-bet here. So he is really just saying, I have the best hand right now, and I'm happy to build a pot.
Yeah, and there was a dead queen, but Schulman still here, 64% equity. And look at this. Right away, Schulman banks queens and 4s.
Now, if Monchek were to spike a jack, it would be a very hidden hand. It would look like he had 2 smaller pair oftentimes.
Very true, and Nick could lose a big pot.
Nick
Nick
fills
just
up immediately.
fills
Now,
up right
we actually
away.
kind of quite like
Oh,
it.
wow. Now, Michael Monchik has caught jacks and 9s, and look, Monchik is leading right out because some of his range is going to be 3 9s.
So I'm very curious to see how Nick Schulman handles this situation. Obviously, we can see he has a monster, but it's interesting to think about how he would want to play his range in the spot.
I agree with that. One thing that Nick wants to think about is he wants to make sure that some of Monchik's weaker hands stay in. Let's say Monchik just had like a 9-8-7 and picked up a gutter here, and I like this flat call from Nick. He's a little concerned that if he raises right now, some of the bottom of Monchik's hand that is range that is drawing almost dead is just going to fold immediately.
So my guess is that Schulman's going to raise on 6th Street. What do you think?
I could see it going either way. I've seen players continue to call with such a powerhouse in this spot. But now we see Mike slow down.
Yeah, interesting. He's not going to get the chance because Monchek's actual hand, it makes a lot of sense to check here. He's worried about being against queens up, right?
Certainly. And facing a bet here, Monchik might just feel that the pot is too big, that he needs to draw to his full house.
Yeah, this is a tough spot.
Did he just check raise?
Okay,
Wow.
so this is a little bit out
He's
of
now-
line to me. He's basically
he's turning
bluffing,
his hand
right?
into a bluff,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is a little bit surprising to me. Nick is actually a little bit concerned.
And Nick 3-bets. No, Nick
no,
3-bets
he's not
to
concerned.
180.
I apologize. I would have.
He's trying to get some immediate value from trip nines, and now
Yeah,
Monchik
Texas
is
Mike
going to
has.
continue to draw to his full house.
Texas Mike may have misstepped a little bit in this hand. If Mike does not improve on the river, we are going to have a little bit of a shift in the chip stacks.
Yeah,
here
this
at
is
the
a
table.
large pot.
Mike needs a 9 or a jack.
You see Nick put in the final bet here.
Sure. Can I get a different one?
He's,
It
Mike's
sounds like
asked
he did not
to
fill
scan
up.
his card and asks for a different one, so we know he's not raising.
Don't look now, but Nick Schulman is going to have 1.6 million after this hand.
Yeah. And Monchik will be down to 2.2, so
He did cold deck Texas Mike in this hand a little bit, but I think Texas Mike lost 1 or 2 bets more than many players would.
yeah, he made an interesting raise on 6 that I think was a bluff raise designed to put some pressure on queens and 4s.
Yeah, and now he's just looking at the size of the pot, and he's just a little bit unsure about letting his hand go.
He's got to ask himself, what can Nick possibly be bluffing with? Nick put in a bet 3-bet
Yeah.
on 6th Street. It is almost impossible for Jackson 9s to be good here.
Right, that 6th Street play really surprised me.
Even with
from
3
Monchik
nines,
here.
you're not liking life here, given how
Yeah.
strong Nick's line was.
Schulman probably believes that Texas Mike has 3 nines here. I think.
And I think that's why Schulman just chose to fast play. It's
Yeah.
because Schulman doesn't have that many combos on 6 that beat that beat 3 nines, but he
Right.
does happen to have one of the ones that
Yeah,
does.
he was really looking to maximize with that full house after kind of almost slow playing, or certainly slow playing on 5th Street. Texas Mike just feeling like he's getting that incredible price, but he has no idea what he can beat, but still considering
Getting
paying
a
off
million
here.
to one.
Yeah, he said I'm getting $1 million to 1.
But I'm never good.
And he says exactly what we've both thought in big limit pots before. I'm getting $1 million, but I'm never good.
And then I usually call.
I know that feeling, but I think this one he really can be quite confident that he's never good. Once
Yeah.
he check raises and calls the 3-bet, he's really just trying to fill
That's a
up.
weird hand.
He has a
Jack.
weaker hand than it's perceived that he has.
Right.
When people make full houses unstud, it feels pretty weird.
Nice.
So Nick's acknowledging that he made a boat. And look at these chip stacks as Nick is creeping up on Texas Mike and probably is maybe into second place in the overall tournament. Anything else?
What do you think about this 8-7-6-5 here from Nick Schulman?
Yeah, I think it makes a good open. It's not a particularly strong draw, but you can just play for a single raise.
And also knowing
folding
that
to any aggression.
perhaps Yuri has to play a little tighter than normal in the big blind with the ICM considerations.
Certainly. Let's see how Yuri approaches the spot. So notice that Yuri is doing what I just said, which is
Right.
that he feels that
Does
D3
call.
can be defended for this price, even with the ICM considerations. And Nick is going to have an interesting decision here. Nick could consider standing pat with this ace low against a 3-card draw.
Now, if you stood pat here, you're just hoping your opponent pairs, or are you ever going to turn this into a bluff?
Both
also?
options are available. Instead, Nick decides to draw at the open ender, and certainly if he were to make a straight on the river, then we would expect to see a bluff.
I think I like the draw better because he can still bluff when he makes the straight, and then he still allows himself to make some very strong hands.
Yes, and he does make a pair of 7s, so let's see if Nick is willing to bluff this hand. I think that he probably will. 3 versus 1, he certainly perceives that he needs to bluff often in this situation.
Right.
And let's see how he chooses sizing-wise, and what Yuri elects to do with a hand that could be an okay bluff catcher.
Certainly the straight would be an automatic bluff. The funny thing with 7s is that normally you wouldn't beat very many hands, but when your opponent draws 3,
Right.
they're actually going to make some big pairs and some 2-pair type hands, but still, not a ton of showdown value for Nick, and because he's able to value bet wide, he's also able to find a lot of bluffs.
Yeah, so he's just going with a half-pot size, which makes a lot of sense for a wide value range. I think Yuri might be able to sniff this one out, though. He unblocks a lot of the pairs that his opponent could easily have. It is a wide-range situation, and you don't defend a D3 to just auto-fold when you make a good bluff catcher as an experienced player.
King 9 is actually probably above the average hand class.
Definitely
Or
is.
the median hand class, I would say.
But he
that
does get away
Yuri's
from
gonna
it,
make.
and Nick is able to get one through there with a hand that... Really, when you have that
That's what you have to
8-7-6-5 in your
raise.
hand, you're going to be bluffing pretty often because you don't make too many good hands.
Right.
For those
and I
that are
think-
watching, Philip is the one that put this tournament together. For those of you viewing and enjoying the show, we've got great commentary from 2 guys who are really good but not good enough to play this tournament clearly, right? Because otherwise they would have been in here. No, I'm kidding. They're very good. I actually listened to their commentary. It's worthwhile. Listen in, learn some stuff, and join us next year at the Super High Roller Bowl Mix Games.
Okay, so Matt Ashton does get the ace as his door card.
And
Let's
he's
see if
going to be
he takes
tempted to
this
pay
spot.
a very wide range of
I think
hands
so
in this
too.
spot.
any one big card would be enough for me.
Yeah, any over to everybody else's cards.
Possibly any 3. Yeah, and here he comes with the Jack 5, which
this
is super reasonable.
More than enough hand.
Everyone should be aware that he's desperate
And
here.
I agree.
I think
probably just any 3 is good enough here, given the
I think
his
he's
stack size at 35.
not going to get through Chad.
Correct.
And this might lure Benny into the pot with his slightly disconnected 3-card.
If I were Chad, I might have been tempted to 2-bet this hand just to get Benny off of any amount of equity.
Good point. Benny probably realizing Chad's not coming in too loose, but he does feel like his hand is connected.
Here's the other thing for Benny is he figures that Chad is going to play a little more honestly with this one player all in already, and he's going to be able to realize his equity a little better without having to call bets.
Extremely good point. Nevertheless, Matt Ashton is definitely going to need to improve. He catches the 4 that Chad would love to see.
And I think Chad should just bet here, even though there's no side pot, just clearing up his equity with the pair of 4s, where Benny's most likely hand is going to be something like a pair of 3s or something weak.
So Matt Ashton is in bad shape here, but he does have 37% equity. He has live cards outside of the 4.
Matt Ashton looking to improve and fade elimination, and if he does not, we are going to be down to our final table of 7.
And I'm going to be out $20.
That's
oh no, your guy has to win.
my guy still has to win.
Well, he's gonna, you know.
It's a long way to go there.
Yeah, I guess it's not a
nice looking card for Ashton's board, but it doesn't actually do anything for him.
Right. He's got a backdoor flush draw now, and now he's got a backdoor wheel draw.
Think about wheel gutter, and Chad just has the 4s.
He's just got to beat 4.
only.
Not only.
So Chad should peel first, because if he makes 2 pair, then Ashton can still win on a duck.
Yeah.
You got a lot of outs. But if you catch 2 pair,
Queens up.
queens up. That really hurts.
And that really almost
So
locks him
Ashton
out.
needs the duck.
GG, bro. We're down to 7. I'm gonna go pee.
See you online, I guess.
Yeah.
Good run, Matt Ashton. Close to the money.
And I thought Matt played really well. Just had a bad run of cards there towards the second half of the day.
I guess I should
Cut
play.
off.
Now,
Maybe even the
I didn't want
hijack.
I don't think Yuri would have played this hand
dumb.
anyway.
It's dumb.
A 4-5-7 facing a raise and a re-raise.
I think I would have.
But given the tournament situation right now, I think it's very clear that he needs to play tight in the spot.
And he
However,
does
I
actually
am wrong.
call.
Yuri has surprised me with
I
his
think he
loose
played it
play in the
fine.
Badugi rounds that we have seen at the table that he's been a part of both times.
I tend to agree. One of the problems with Yuri's hand is that oftentimes you're just going to be up against Phil with a stronger draw 1 like we see here,
Yeah.
and you're really going to need to make a Badugi to win the pot. It's going to be very hard to make the best 3 card.
By the way, Monchek is in a bad spot here. He has decided to 4-bet and play his hand as a pat. However, a pat king against 2 opponents is a very difficult hand to have hold up.
While I agree with you, Chris, I think it's hard to find another option to play this hand because breaking,
open it, yeah.
really just not breaking to anything good, right? So it's kind of that ultimate
Not to
pat
say
and
that
pray
there's some
scenario.
players
He
that
knows
always
that Yuri
play
just cold calling likely is still drawing,
Yes.
and he has to just hope that Phil is also drawing.
I'm a little surprised that Yuri's involved in this hand. This is definitely a situation that you were just talking about him maybe wanting to avoid. Playing a big pot where he could get himself right down in that danger zone with the next 2 spots not paying any money in this tournament.
Right, perhaps he felt compelled by the price already being in there for the big blind, but it does seem a little loose, facing what's already going to be a tighter range than normal from Phil.
Yes, that makes sense. Well, Yuri and Phil are both looking to improve. Monchek is hoping to hang on with his King-Queen Badugi here.
Now, the problem for Monchik is not only does he have to pat and pray, but he has to also worry about getting bluffed.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to just call down here when somebody else says they're pat because their value range is going to be so far ahead of you. We see that Sternheimer does improve right away to a 10 Badugi.
Yeah, and Phil has an interesting decision here because in some ways he would prefer to play as a call and pat, right? Because he would like Monchek to keep in worse Badugis. On the other hand, protecting his hand from Yuri, the 3rd player in the pot, is vital.
I strongly prefer raising here as Phil for 2 reasons. One is you get more information from Monchik, and 2 is being able to get Yuri out of the pot is super, super valuable.
Notice that Yuri has reduced into a very strong 3-card, ace-4-5. I wonder how he's going to feel about this spot, given that he's already put in 4 small bets on the pre-flop street.
Yuri might be slightly regretting his decision to get involved because now that he's here, it's very difficult to know how he should proceed.
It's very hard to find a way out of this hand at this point with such a premium 3-card.
The problem is that Phil is really representing a Badugi at this point, and the average Badugi Phil's going to make drawing 1 is much stronger than the average dealt Badugi. So against a hand like that, Yuri might be, he might have as few as 4 or 5 outs.
Correct. He's getting an incredible price in this bloated pot, but this is a tough situation. Sternheimer desperately wants him out.
Now, very interesting to see also what Michael Monchik does.
Yeah, Monchek really has no good options at this point.
If Monchik 3-bets this street and pats, does Phil ever break off that 10?
I think it's hard
Or
to
do you
break.
think it's just
I
too
think
strong?
it's hard to break against the player with Monchek's image.
I tend to agree with you. And Monchik just calls, and now he's in a really, really ugly
Yeah,
spot.
I mean, if I'm Monchik here, I suppose I think the best option is to draw 2.
I tend to agree with you, or perhaps just to have folded to Phil's raise, as tight as that sounds. But you know that Yuri's still drawing strong,
He has not. He's decided to stand pat and see what Phil's up to.
and he's hoping that Phil breaks something.
Phil confidently pats behind. It is Yuri who is really in a difficult situation now.
Now
as
I
the
think
out-of-position player.
that Monchik can just get away facing another bet here from Sternheimer.
Sternheimer is wondering whether or not he should bet. He has a little bit of incentive maybe to check. He's failed in his attempt to get Yuri out of the pot. Maybe preserving his chips here is worth a little something. His hand is marginal.
This is true, and
Yeah,
maybe
he does decide to check, so he's actually really, really preserving his chip stack as best as he can here.
one other benefit to this check is he can actually convince Monchik that maybe, well, not with this exact hand,
Yeah.
but if Monchik had some other pat hand that was breakable, now Monchik might think that Phil actually doesn't have that strong of a hand.
Wow, Yuri
and
makes
convince
it.
him to pat it. And
Yuri
wow.
has spiked a 7 of spades to win a massive pot and decimate Phil Sternheimer. I believe he
So-
should come out betting here after seeing that passive action.
I completely agree because it looks like both players have very marginal pat hands.
This is a
And
great spot for Yuri.
Phil
and
is
a
puking on
very
the inside right
disappointing
now.
spot for Phil.
The problem is that Phil can actually still beat the occasional value bet here. Once it's gone check on the previous street, Phil could have some jacks.
This would be a very, very nice fold, I think, to save his 80K. Look at this fold.
wow.
I'm actually very impressed by
All right,
this
as the
play.
man is raking the pot. What you don't know about him is Taylor.
Although
with all the
I
clothes.
believe that
In
Phil
addition to
called and
that,
he was just
in the bathroom.
Oh, I'm
with
sorry.
laundry care, toothbrush.
Yeah, that was
quickly
a hand
called.
funeral.
Okay, my
Dude,
mistake.
hygiene, physically fit, tailored clothes. It's a thing, right?
And-
like all encompassing. You're like, I'm going to live my best life.
Yes.
And look, and that's what happens.
So I expect to see both players check over to Yuri, and really not a ton of incentive for either player to continue actually on this board.
Now, Benny has those future blockers that you've talked about a number of times before with the queens.
He does. The problem is that he's in a three-way pot. He's not closing the action. He doesn't have much immediate equity besides the gut shot. He doesn't even have a backdoor flush draw. He wants just a little bit more interaction, in my opinion, to continue in this hand. And Yuri is just not going to have a ton of natural bluffs. This flop's going to interact very well with his cold calling range. I think Benny just needs to get out of the way, and same with Negreanu.
Very interesting for me as someone who doesn't play a lot of PLO to see that how confident you are that the aces should just be very willing to check fold this situation.
Yeah, the aces just really need some more additional equity, in my opinion, to continue. The problem is, what are you going to do on almost any turn facing further aggression? And it's going to be very hard to value bet your hand at any point as well.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense when you lay it out for us like that.
But Daniel does see
Yeah.
the situation a little differently. He might be looking at the strength of his backdoor nut flush draw and thinking that perhaps Yuri will also slow down with some of the straight draws.
Yeah, maybe he thinks he's going to get a pretty honest reaction from Yuri on turn cards, and he'll be able to sort of, navigate his way cheaply through the rest of the hand. He does pick up an interesting turn card. This is a card that both players are somewhat happy to see, but also somewhat worried about seeing the straight on the board now.
Super interesting spot for both players. The problem with Negreanu's hand here is he might be tempted to semi-bluff, but he doesn't have any jack or 10 in his hand, and Yuri's going to have a lot of flat calls that contain that jack 10. So it's really difficult to use this combo when Yuri can just hit this so hard himself.
If Daniel decides to check this spot, can Yuri bet his hand for value, or does he have to worry about the straight?
In a cash game situation, I would very likely want to go for value here, because if you do run into the straight, you still have quite good equity, and you can get some other hands to call. In this tournament situation, Yuri would be in kind of nightmare land if he were to bet here and face an all-in. Yes, he would have the equity to call even against the straight, but he would be in just this ICM suicide spot. I expect Yuri to check this back with a slightly disguised strong hand that's going to also be very strong in a lot of rivers and play those rivers.
Really interesting. What Yuri thinks that he wants to see is maybe a heart, but he really wants not to see a heart on the river here.
Correct. And this is the kind of card that might just freeze the action entirely.
Yeah, I wonder if Daniel has shown the propensity sometimes to make bluffs that other people would not go for.
If you get here with a hand as weak as Daniel's, it is quite tempting to turn it into a bluff. The problem is, again, you don't have the right cards for it.
Right.
You want Yuri to have aces and queens and stuff like that in his hand. You don't have a single 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or jack, so it makes it very difficult to think that Yuri doesn't have those cards himself. Having said that, Yuri, by checking back the turn, has reduced the amount of times he has jack 10.
Yeah, you're right. And it would be tempting maybe for Negreanu to even just put out a small bet here, representing just the one card straight.
Right. Now, the problem is that Yuri's going to have a lot of those one-card straights himself. Even if he has something like a set of kings, he often has a straight with it, for instance.
Yeah, fascinating to see how this one's going to play out.
And Negreanu does just elect to
Aces.
check. And this is one of the reasons I would have liked to see Negreanu just check fold the
hearts?
flop.
You want a heart?
Because it's really
You want a heart?
difficult
You want a
to
heart?
use his hand to
You want a
bluff
heart?
with.
Sure?
Not
Sure you want a
interacting
heart?
very well with that middle of the deck.
Right, you called it on the flop. Yep.
See? Baffled. He baffled. But he had a hand. It's fine. You're allowed to play that hand.
And Yuri's going to enjoy this result after that 6 of clubs hits the river. He's going to lose the pot some decent chunk of the time there.
I don't think Benny really wants to fold very many
giving away
hands in this
secrets
spot.
Race.
However, this is not a bad spot for Phil Sternheimer. At least he is now in position. Unfortunately for him, he picks up one of the
Until we
worst
see his
hands that you
hand,
can see.
Yeah. I think that,
You think he's going to wait for a better spot?
I mean, this is close, isn't it?
It really is,
We know
because
the equities run close.
It's very rare that he's going to get to be in position throughout the entire hand to see the drawing decision. So even though his hand is very weak looking on its face, he knows Benny has an incredibly wide range in this spot, and the hands do run kind of close in hot and cold equity pre-flop and deuce to 7 triple draw. And you can see that he may be considering going with this hand, even with having to draw 4 cards.
I think it's very close, Chris. And one point that you made yesterday that's a nice point is, let's say they were playing a 3-handed game. Now Benny's range is a little bit wider than normal, but with all the card removal of all the folded hands, Benny is a little bit stronger than normal.
I have to say, I don't know if there's any merits to this 3-bet raise all in. Why not call? If Benny stands pat and you catch bricks, maybe you save your last chips.
Right. If he stands pat and you catch 2 queens and 2 jacks,
right?
maybe you can just
I
get
think
away.
that this would be one spot where you would want to keep a little bit of chips behind just for the worst case scenarios. We don't have Benny's cards. However, we can be sure that he's probably not drawing 4. And oh my God, Benny
goodness.
does indeed have the pat hand.
So the one spot, and I still don't know if Phil would get away for only 45,000 more.
I don't know either. We'll see what he catches on his first draw, but that would have been the spot to maybe save that last 45,000 chips and wait and see.
But I tend to agree. Probably just give yourself the opportunity.
This is exactly the situation that Phil wanted to avoid, unfortunately. I said the hands run close in equity, but they don't run close in equity when you have a pat 8 versus a draw 4.
Right. And again, the likelihood of Benny having a strong hand did go up a little bit with all those folded cards at a 7-handed table, but
Good point. Well,
not likely to run into a hand this strong.
Philip Sternheimer needs a miracle here. Not only that, but he will realize that Benny can have a lot of relatively weak pats in this spot, so he could draw dead to a 9.
I think it's not inconceivable that he would keep the 9 here.
However,
there's
maybe
2 more
seeing
draws,
2
right?
9s would make it even worse for him.
Yeah.
I always get confused in all-in situations, to be honest.
This is not a fun spot for
No,
Phil.
remember when we said maybe he could save that 45K chips? I'm not sure whether he could save it now, having improved slightly to the 4-5 draw or the 4-5-9 draw, but it would certainly be tempting to fold and hope to pick up a hand on the next hand.
Right.
I mean, unless it's king.
I suspect he's going to draw 3 here, Chris. But what do you think? Do you think he's considering keeping the 9?
He does say 2, so this is going to be the end of the tournament for Philip Sternheimer. There's really no way that he can change his mind now, having kept those
Even
9.
if he catches something like deuce 8,
Yeah,
I don't
it's
think
not
he's gonna-
possible. He's hoping he's up against something really rough, like a bad 10, which, to be fair, would be a reasonable hand for Benny to play in the spot in some situations. But unfortunately, our tournament organizer is basically at 0% equity in this spot and does not know it.
Of course, Benny doesn't know that.
Last hand, I made number 1 Badugi.
Really?
Yeah. I was just staring at it.
I think Benny's very confident in this spot here, but I agree with you.
Certainly,
that
but
he probably doesn't realize he has 100% yet.
Definitely could think that Phil's drawing live.
Yeah. And Phil has he made 9 perfect? This is
Yeah.
going to be very
Wow.
tilting for him.
This
as
is very tilting.
He now is going to feel like there's a decent chance that he's got it.
He's absolutely caught his dream catch, and
Now,
unfortunately, still
when he
dead.
watches this back later, tomorrow, whenever, now he's going to be so disappointed that he kept this 9 because he could actually be drawing live now with the 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right? Yeah, maybe he'll think about it that way.
You're Pat, right?
I'm still pat.
That makes sense. Although we've talked about how everything would be different. Butterfly
Show
effect.
Kurt.
Sure.
That's it. We're all in here, and that's it. And Benny has the pat 8.
Beat. He's like, no way.
Achievement.
Nice play with you, man.
GG, bro.
I have to say that, like, I don't think I've ever been so upset to get eliminated. My head is, like, totally spinning.
Sorry, bro. I get it. The pain is what we play for.
No, it's just that Badugi hand. I have to say, I'm totally
Unfortunate for Nick Schulman, who really is getting low on chips and gets another bring in here.
7.
Monchek finds another raising hand. This time another strong hand.
ICM.
I know. You're right.
Notice that Schulman has a defensible hand here.
Yeah, he does.
I
Even
see him. He
with the
he
ICM,
bullied
he's
me
already
on
got
the
20K in there.
It's okay. You get to.
And he
He
thinks
certainly-
Monchik could potentially be opening light.
He
Is this a
certainly has
spot?
seen Monchek out of line in a number of spots.
And he does call. Which I think is very understandable. And he can quite easily pull ahead on this street, which he does not.
No, but this is a dangerous situation for Nick Schulman, as Michael Monchek has also caught poorly, but has a very good hand. Nick is definitely going to feel compelled to take one off here, I think.
Yeah, certainly from a chip EV perspective, definitely. And maybe he just thinks that Monchik's getting out of line, which he was in some of the previous hands, but in this case he just has the goods.
A monumental fifth street coming up for Nick. And both players catch well.
And now Nick is really going to be tempted to continue with his 10-6 draw, which can actually be ahead of some of the draws that Monchik can have. Monchik can either have paired or started with some type of lemon in the hole.
Absolutely. Nick is close to all in with one more bet here. He has a bet and a quarter remaining in his stack. And catches,
And he
very
catches
well,
very good,
but
and now-
so does Texas Mike.
Now Nick can just never get away here. He's drawing to a 6 against the made 7 of Monchik, who can have a lot of worse hands in this
Yeah,
spot.
I wouldn't fault Nick for going ahead and raising his money in here, as he's not going to be able to get away from it on the river anyway.
Only 25,000 back. Yeah, that's the question. Is he ever going to save that last green chip?
I don't see how he can against the player he perceives to be out of line. He would have such a short stack remaining that he would be faced with a very difficult decision anyway. Once he decided to defend this hand, the cards sort of played themselves. Michael Monchek does have the goods.
Yeah, and he elects to go with that play, thinking the same as you are.
And he is very
You
disappointed
mind
to
showing
see
first? Sure.
that Texas Mike has such a strong holding.
And he asks Mike to show first so he can see if what he needs to catch to improve to
I
win
mean,
here.
Mike could catch an ace and
and
make
he'd
the
be just
wheel.
drawing dead, right?
I don't want to squeeze an ace and lose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How,
No, I
how
always
Yeah,
go
of
for
course. You're
brutal
all
would
in.
that be?
I don't swear.
We, by the magic of TV, can
You've got a
see.
Straight 6, so I need an ace. Or
Oh, and if he squeezes
five
this, he's going to
to
see
chop.
he has a no side.
Oh, wow. Let's listen in as Nick Schulman squeezes for his tournament life.
and it's a nothing across. And it's a club. Which means I'm a 2-to-1 dog, I believe. You remember your... Did you have an ace? You had a 5. Did you have an ace, Yuri? You remember? It
No,
doesn't
I
matter.
think it
didn't.
was
I'll
two
tell
five.
you
Yes,
what.
he's a time
I had the ace of clubs.
That's fine.
No, 2-5.
I had the ace
They
of
both had
clubs.
fives,
I had the ace of
yeah.
clubs.
You had the ace of clubs?
I did.
For real?
Yeah.
Then he's just
Is
dead.
that bad? I mean,
I lose. Then.
I did. I had ace. No, with ace.
Wow, you've really outdone yourself today, Daniel. Good luck, guys.
I'm to save you with the sweat.
No, I know.
I had the ace of clubs.
Congratulations, guys. Enjoy.
And with that, Chris,
2 aces in the hole.
we've reached the money in the tournament as Nick Schulman unfortunately exits in 6th place.
Yeah, a hasty exit, a
Okay.
very disappointing way for Nick to go out here.